Why America and the West is collapsing. Reason number 2, communication. We're more connected than we've ever been as a culture, as a country, as the world, but our communication is actually suffering. I can communicate with the entire world through YouTube, only if you like and subscribe and share videos and things like that. But I can call someone on the other side of the planet. I can video with someone on the other side of the planet instantly. I can send emails to tons of people at the same time. We can do miraculous things now with communication and technology that we've never been able to do before. But our communication is, I would say, at one of our all-time lows. Meaning, when I say something or I try to communicate an idea or my opinion to someone, they have a hard time either accepting that information or even understanding that information. And I think this is fundamentally due to the way that we use technology in a way, and just due to our hardwiring as human beings. Now let me explain. Well, as a human being, we first evolved to communicate with one another without language. Correct? I mean, if you look at animals, they don't speak a language. We can hear the birds chirping in the background outside, and they have some form of language, but we would say it's rudimentary in regard to poetry or books or, me speaking like this right now. We first had to evolve by using body language, by using smell, by using a lot of other cues besides our voice. That came later. We then started to communicate. We smell a lion and we would say, then it was lion, right? And then we started to form a language after naming some of these different things. Well, now we almost are the opposite, meaning we get rid of the body language. We get rid of that form of communication through things like Twitter, Facebook. That's why I'm a big fan of YouTube, because it's a video, right? Although I'm not in the room with you, I'm communicating not just with my voice, but with my body, right? You can see my body language, my facial expressions as I communicate. And this is important because, again, when we evolved, we didn't have all of this language, especially at our first stages of it. It was very rudimentary, and we had to use facial expressions, body language, to communicate what was going on. Now that things are just in plain text, we've gotten rid of the body language, the tone of voice, and the other nuances that go along with it. So I think, what did communication teach me back in college? I think it was like 58% or something like that. 60% is through body language. Another 20 to 30% is in, or maybe even more than that. I think maybe it was 38%, 52%. What's that? Is that 90% yet? I think so, that my math is correct. And only about maybe 7 to 10% is through text, through the actual words that you say. So if I say, I love you, you're not going to believe me, right? If I say, I truly and deeply love you, with eye contact and with passion, that's going to make more sense. Where the body language tells you if you really mean those words. So when we strip all that down and we just have text, now again, with our communication, we're getting better. We're using videos, we're using things like podcasts. I think podcasts is a great tool because you have two people sitting down or one person communicating, excuse me, and you're able to have a longer form conversation where people can hash out ideas, and especially if two people are in the same room, or if you're able to see the content, not just listen to it, you're able to get a lot more from that longer form. Whereas even, our first stages of communication through these mediums, television, it's very quick, right? It's a 5-minute segment here, a 2-minute segment there. So we've gotten better over time, but I still think that we're not communicating well because we're relying a lot on the same sorts of quick forms of communication. And even Twitter, what is it, 190 characters, or is it double that now, 200 something characters? But it's very, very short and very, very simple. And what's another thing that we try to use to communicate better? We use emojis, right? Because we need a little bit more emphasis on certain things. So again, we're getting better, but it's still very limited. So we have these problems with our communication. Even though we're connected more than we've ever been, our communication is suffering. I mean, some examples of how bad our communication is in the past, several years. We have, Trump got elected in office in 2016, and people, if you say anything, if somebody agreed with if let's just say they're a Democrat and they agreed with one thing that Trump says or does, all of a sudden people can't, they say, oh, that person's crazy, they've lost it, they're supporting Trump. And it's like, where's the nuance? Hey, I'm just talking about this one thing. And people just throw it off to the side and say, nope, full stop. We can't have anything to do with that. So there's no nuance in politics. Same thing now with Biden. And right now, Republicans, nothing that Biden says can be good because of who he is and what he's supported as. And it's like, we're going to need to communicate and talk about reality. But if we're not willing to do that because we're so stuck to our team, let's just say, red team, blue team, right? What team's better, red team or blue team? You're on the red team, I'm on the blue team. Who's better? You're going to say red team, I'm going to say blue team. It's just the nature of us being put into different sides. But we have to realize that the red team and the blue team, they got to work together, especially if they're in the same country, living in the same cities and the same states and within the same borders. So that's one area that I've found. Another area that has been, that I think really accelerated this beyond almost, again, beyond repair. I say that, and again, I'm hoping that these things aren't beyond repair, but the coronavirus pandemic, I mean, people can't even talk about your immune system or saying anything about the vaccine or about masks or any of these things. They can't even have an opinion about these things without literally their business or their livelihood going on. I mean, I was just looking up someone that wrote a foreword in a book that I'm reading, and it's a mind-blowing but amazing book. Changed my life. Literally, this guy that Dr. Mario Martinez wrote a book called The Mind-Body Code, and I've been researching his work, and I just started reading the book. But the concepts that are in the book, I've done a ton of research on it, and I've watched a lot of his work and his podcasts. It's amazing. And one of these doctors that writes a foreword, she was, a gynecologist, an MD, someone who's very, very well respected for like 40 years. And then she says one thing, or she says maybe multiple things about the pandemic. And now, if you look up, I just did a little research on her, and I was like, who is this person? You want to like attracts like. You have someone writing a foreword, they're probably a similar, interesting person. And she's just, a crazy person now because of this. And I don't know if she is or not. I didn't do too much research after that, but it's very interesting to me that someone can say one thing and then nobody agrees with them. But for 40 years, they've been, on this path, doing good things, but then now we have this problem. So we have this lack of communication, or this inability to want to listen to someone explain. Now it's like, as soon as you say one thing, we're done. Another area that we find is getting now really muddy in the water is sex and gender. People can't even define what a woman is or what a man is, or what any of these things mean. It's like, it means whatever you want it to mean. And we can't, as human beings, have that when we want to communicate. We have to have rules and boundaries around words. And again, this is just talking about the word side. We had just discussed about how our communication is suffering when we get rid of the body language and we just communicate with words. But now we're getting to the point where you just say some words. The words that you say, just the simple words, can't even be relatable because we define the words differently between two people. And between 10 people, there might be 10 different definitions for the same word. That's a recipe for disaster. We have to have some rules and regulations. Or if I say, that's black and you think it's blue, like I'm going to order what I think is black and you're going to send me a blue one and I'm going to be upset. It's like we have to have some rules about what we're talking about, or else we're going to be in constant state of confusion. And I see that all around the world. I see kids being confused. I see adults being confused. I see people being confused when they're talking to each other in Congress. Like they are almost talking about two different things, but how are they supposed to come together and come to an agreement when they're not even able to communicate on a basic level, because the way that they're thinking or their assumptions about what the other person is saying are not based in reality, or based in their reality, not a shared reality. And so communication, we need that shared reality. We have to be able to come to some form of common ground. And I see that happening in the Western world, especially in the United States where I live. And it's very, very interesting, because again, it seems like as much as we're connected, we have so much access to communication, means of communication through technology, but yet our communication itself is so bad. It's so messy. And maybe that's just because we're new with technology. It's a new thing, and we're learning how to use it. Like I said, we're getting better. We didn't have emojis before, now we have emojis. We didn't have things like YouTube before, now we do. And we're using more and more of those avenues, and maybe it starts to sort itself out. But again, when I see certain situations, like I was just talking about in politics or the coronavirus pandemic, or with sex and gender, and people aren't able to even have a conversation. I'm sure you've had certain situations like this happen in your life in the past couple of years, where someone says something and you're like, instantly you go, well, I can't even share my opinion with that person because of what they just said. There's no way that, knowing what they just said, I'm going to be able to have some form of dialogue with that person. They think that they're right, and I can tell by what they just said. And again, there's some of those examples are like politics or the pandemic or sex and gender. And so what happens, right? You then either get into an argument with that person because you're saying, I'm gonna tell them who's right, all right, and you're gonna fight, and it ends up not being good, or you just stay quiet and you repress that sensation, that feeling, to express yourself. And I think that that's where we are in a lot of areas. And that to me is dangerous. And that to me shows why we're collapsing. When you have people who are not telling the truth, that's dangerous. That's one of the reasons why I have this channel, is I'm just here to speak what I believe as the truth. I'm just sharing my perspective and sharing my opinion on things, and you can do with it whatever you like. You can disagree with me, you can agree with me, you can watch it and like it, you can watch it and hate it. But for me, I want to speak the truth, meaning what I see and what I believe, and I want to be able to try to communicate that to people. And if I'm not truthful, if I'm saying things that I don't believe, then that starts to manipulate what's going on in reality. And if I don't say anything, then again, just like the conversation with the friend, yes, it might lead into an argument, but at least that person knows where you are. Whereas if you hold back, I think that you're harming yourself, but you're also harming that other person. It's like, wouldn't you want to know if someone was crazy or not? If they're not saying anything and they have crazy thoughts like they're going to kill you, right? Or they're going to do something dangerous even to themselves. Maybe not kill you, but do something dangerous to themselves, or they're going to go off and do something crazy. You'd kind of want to know that. You'd want them to be communicating and giving you these signs and symptoms of what's going on. So when we hold back the truth and we don't say anything, and we fear the communication because we know that it's not, that we're not going to get anywhere, then what starts to happen? we start to build up resentment. We start to say, oh, these idiots, right? What do people say if they're Republican? All these crazy liberals. What about these the Democrats? They look at the Republicans and say, oh, you right wing, alt right, white supremacist. People. It's like you start to label people and you go, I don't even want to associate with those people. But what needs to happen, and I learned this from Jordan Peterson, another person who's been they tried to silence him, but he, in his psychology classes, again, even before I started watching Jordan Peterson, before he got controversial, in his psychology lectures, I took a whole course from him, and he talked about how even though you have people who are on one side of the spectrum, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, you need each other. If we don't have an ability to communicate with each other, if we get so extreme on either end of that spectrum that we're not able to have any sort of communication, that's bad, because you need each other. If everyone was the exact same, the world would be a terrible place, because nothing new would happen. It would just be the same thing over and over and over again. And that's a recipe for disaster. You need a little chaos from time to time, and you need a little order from time to time. You need the balance of both. And right now, I feel like it's a lot of chaos, and we're not able to communicate because of that. And even though we're in this time where we have the most access to tools of communication that we've ever had. So that's my thoughts on communication. I think I could say a lot more on that, but I'm going to stop it right there. Until next time, until I start giving you some more reasons on why I think America and the West is collapsing, do your best to stay positive, but, comment and let me know what you think. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Or is this just, again, someone who's just talking out their butt and isn't relating to what's going on? So I appreciate the comments, because it helps me understand, again, not just from my perspective. I'm giving you my perspective, but I want to hear other people's perspectives as well, because again, if we don't communicate, if we don't share, then we're going to build resentment, we're going to build walls, we're going to dig ourselves into our own holes, and we're going to need help to get out of those things, and the only way that we can do that is with each other. So thank you, and until next time, I'll see you then.